We're really taking a long-term approach, really, to bring this to the millions, to the masses, and we want psychedelics to be a reality.
BioNeex is the first biopharma R&D open exchange platform for licensing and co-development partnerships of drug candidates. We are working closely with biopharmaceutical companies that are actively seeking preclinical and clinical stage drug candidates for in-licensing and co-development partnerships to expand their R&D pipelines. If you are a development stage biotech company and are looking for licensing and co-development partners for your drug candidates, then list them for free on BioNeex and get contacted directly by these biopharmaceutical companies. We are already working with many partners. Would you like to learn more about BioNeex? Feel free to get in touch with us. We look forward to working with you.
Hello everyone, today we are back again with BioNeex interview. Our guest today is a co-founder and vice president of discovery of Bright Minds Biosciences, Dr. Gideon Shapiro. Hello, Dr. Shapiro. It's great to having you today in our BioNeex interview.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Thank you very much. Bright Minds Biosciences is a Canadian Stock Exchange listed biotech company dedicated to developing next generation therapeutics to improve the lives of patients with severe and life-altering brain diseases. Please, Dr. Shapiro, tell us a little bit more about the company and what makes this development stage biotech so unique.
Thank you. First, I'd like to note that the company is listed on the OTC US exchange and also is filed for listing on the NASDAQ. So we're very excited about that. Expect in the next 3 months or so to be a NASDAQ company.
That's a great news. Congratulations.
Thank you. Bright Minds is really in this exciting new space. I'm sure everybody's talking about it, and your viewers will all know the psychedelic space is now an extremely exciting area in the neuropsychiatry field, where there's just an amazing unmet medical need for new, really effective drugs to treat things like major depressive disorder, or MDD, where millions of patients suffer and have very few therapeutic options. And psychedelics, basically the first generation compound breakthrough here is a compound called ketamine, which was recently approved by and marketed by Johnson & Johnson Janssen as Spravato. And what we found is in this new field, the psychedelics also have this incredible potential to treat what otherwise is untreatable. The standard medications like the SSRI antidepressants are just not very effective, and 30% of all patients are untreatable. So the psychedelics, what the exciting part is, the first companies show that the psilocybin and psychedelic compounds are effective, right? And so what we are doing, what's really unique about us, is we're taking the long-term pharmaceutical approach to taking them from this first generation of psychedelic compounds that are natural products that have really, really serious limitations. And so today, although they work, you've only had maybe 100 patients in trials, and they're limited in scope, and they're also limited from a regulatory standpoint and a safety standpoint to how many patients will probably be effectively treatable. That's because the FDA, there's certain safety issues with these compounds. Not only that, there's compliance issues with the psychedelic trip time, if you will, that is a long duration. And third of all, really, you need to be dosing thousands of patients and ultimately millions.
Correct.
To do that, you need a second generation of drugs that are psychedelic, that have the efficacy mechanism of action, but are much safer, can be dosed really under any scheduling you want. Different doses can be given. And so that kind of robustness needs large clinical trials, not hundreds of patients, but potentially thousands of patients. And what that means is they also need money, the financial wherewithal of big pharma kind of budgets to develop that. So really, it's being embraced by big pharma, but for them really to embrace it and for large societies to be impacted, we are going to need a lot more finance behind it, and essentially the economics has to work. And what that means is big pharma has to be involved. So the third piece that the current psychedelic companies don't have is the necessary intellectual property or patent protection, really to get big pharma to get behind it and invest in it. And investment is going to be what's needed to develop this. And also from the regulatory standpoint for the FDA, they're going to have to basically find and approve drugs that can be dosed to treat millions of patients. So next generation drugs is what we are all about, basically, and have the team assembled and the expertise to develop big pharma drugs.
Very interesting. It's quite unique, as you described. You also talk about a little bit, mentioning as the next generation. Can you a little bit explain us about your proprietary platform technology and the current drug development pipeline? Like what else you guys are having in your pipeline?
Exactly. So what's needed and what we have that's really special is you need the domain expertise in chemistry, psychedelic chemistry of these compounds, and also especially the pharmacology, the biology, to be able to know what drugs to make, how to design these drugs, and then how to screen them in molecular pharmacology tests on cloned receptors. And so what we know now is that the target of psychedelics, what you really want is to target it specifically for what's known as the 5-HT2A subtype of this serotonin receptor. Everybody knows about serotonin, and the classic antidepressants act by enhancing serotonin, but they're not specific. So the current generation of drugs, including the SSRIs, are totally not specific. They just flood the brain with serotonin and don't act like a laser on a specific molecular target. And while a little better, the psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin are also unselective. And in particular, there's one subtype of receptor that mediates cardiac toxicity called the 5-HT2B receptor. So what for pharmaceutical industries and the FDA to get behind this, drugs have been taken off the market that typically that target or hit this 5-HT2B toxic receptor are a big problem. And as you'll note, the current clinical trials for psychedelics, they can only dose 2 doses, right?
Yeah.
And that's just going to be a problem, right? Because any disease, some patients are going to need maybe 4 doses over a month. Some patients will need 2. So to really work for millions of people, you can't be limited by saying, oh, you get 2 doses, right? And that's it. Basically, we don't even know whether the regulatory people have not approved this, and we have no idea. But believe me, it's going to be very restricted in the current generation. And so what we are doing, you need to have the molecular biology to be able to design drugs, test them against these, make sure it doesn't have the toxicity part, that it's selective, doesn't touch this 5-HT2B receptor, but gets into the brain and hits the psychedelic 5-HT2A receptor. That's well known. A well-known issue among drug scientists and really the specialists, but the layman and most of the public really are not aware of this. And so we're really taking a long-term approach really to bring this to the millions, to the masses, and we want psychedelics to be a reality. So step 1 is real. We know that these things can work and really treat. Step 2 is always the hard part. The devil's in the details to engineer a better next generation drug that has the efficacy and the good stuff and works, but also doesn't have risks and can be used in a broad context to treat patients.
So you said in a broad context, can you a little bit tell us about the exact indications? What are these indications that you are trying in areas to apply in brain diseases?
Right. So the number one by far, I would say, disease of unmedical need is major depressive disorder. I mean, that is just by far the biggest disorder of unmedical need, where you really have, 30 million or more patients that are untreated with the current medication. So that really is the biggest market of unmedical need, that also is something that partners are most interested in, because it is a well-established protocol of how to basically demonstrate clinical efficacy. That's really the beauty of this new mechanism. In the past, you needed to dose for 3 months, and it was very tricky to even show efficacy, even of Prozac and the SSRIs. That took a long time actually to work out and to figure. You have to dose for months. The beauty of psychedelics and the amazing excitement is it's a rapid acting drug. So really within a month of dosing, and in fact, it's intermittent dosing. You do not dose these every day. You go in, and essentially it's what we liken to chemical electroshock. You take the pill, you get a brain. Essentially what it does is it rewires the brain, or if you will, we call it a brain reboot. And so you don't need to dose every day. What's beautiful about these drugs is you're not constantly loading your body with drug. You have a one-time reset. And then really the question is, how often do you have to come in? How fast does the brain circuit drift into disorder? And how often do you need to reset it? And nobody knows the answer to that, right? Nobody knows. We just know that you can reset it. You can show efficacy with 2 doses, but how often for millions of patients and for a given patient you need to do a reset, nobody knows. That's why we need a drug that's totally safe. So, you can reset whenever you want. If you need it every week, you can take it every week. If you need it, less, you can take it less. If you need it twice a week, you can take it twice a week. So that's the kind of medicine we're doing. So that, there are no limitations to treating the targeted patient. The other disorders are similar. Their PTSD is well known. So recently a trial came out for MDMA from the MAPS Foundation. They're focusing on PTSD. That's an exciting indication. So those are the 2 that we know about that these drugs work in. But it's going to be likely that basically other neuropsychiatric disorders, they all have this fundamental circuitry disturbance that can be addressed by similar mechanisms. So even OCD, anything neuropsychiatry that has a common bond to the symptoms of MDD or PTSD will be addressable. But really the big one, obviously, for a partner and for us, would be MDD as a starting indication.
Yeah, very interesting. It seems like you are approaching really big market that also makes the company, besides the technology, what you are bringing, makes very interesting for potential partners, right? So as you also mentioned a few times about partners, are you actually looking currently for licensing and co-development partners for your programs at the moment? And who would be your ideal partner? And then I want to also mention to our audience that Bright Minds Biosciences is a BioNeex platform member. Their drug candidate already listed on BioNeex. So why you believe that BioNeex can also help you on that, Dr.
Well, I think there's 2 things, because that's our lead pipe. We have a pipeline. So we're also not, pigeonholed into just a psychedelics company. We really have 2 molecular targets, and they're both serotonin, but there's another subtype of receptor called the 5-HT2C receptor. And so that has been a mainstream pharma target for a long time. And there was a drug on the market approved for that called lorcaserin or Belvic, which was from Arena Pharmaceuticals. And so that was initially an obesity drug, but now what's been found is that this class of drugs, which has intrinsically less side effects, can be used for this exciting new field of infantile epilepsies.
Right.
So that everybody knows about that. The big excitement was Epidiolex from GW Pharma as a cannabidiol. But now what's come out is that serotonin drugs like these can work on Dravet's disease, which is another severe infantile disorder in epilepsy. And so what's now recognized is this other subtype can treat those disorders of epilepsy. So we don't, not only we have the psychedelic neuropsychiatry component, which really is pretty clear, we'd sort of like to keep that potentially for ourselves, but are open to partnering. But we have this other pipeline asset that's about to enter the clinic that is really well established, is really what we call sort of we're sort of a psychedelics company with a big pharma kicker pipeline program where, you know, we'd be very interested in partnering that because it's really close to the clinic. It's a very exciting new field in neurology and childhood epilepsies. And these drugs now, there's nothing on the market now in this mechanism. Lorcaserin is actually removed from the market. But recently, the old drug called fenfluramine, which used to be a diet drug, has just been approved and is being marketed by Zogenix. They're now marketing that drug and have approval, but it has the same problem, this toxic liability that I told you about before.
Right.
It touches this 5-HT2B receptor. And so it has this intrinsic, it was actually removed from the market as a diet drug because of cardiac valvulopathy, and patients died. And so now it has reemerged because it's so effective in the severe disease. It has now been approved with limitations, like I said, severe limitations from the FDA in safety monitoring that go on this label for the approved drug. So it's really exciting for a partner because we have a next generation drug also in that field that's going to be safe. So we've already demonstrated the efficacy of that in the models, in the preclinical models, and our position in that compound is in development and set to go into the clinic. So that's really kind of exciting for us. We're most interested in partnering that asset because it's the most advanced in the pipeline, and we're still working. The psychedelics as a drug is a little behind that. We haven't yet nominated the candidate for IND enabling studies. So I think, you know, there are two opportunities, and what we're really amazed at is there's a lot of excitement from big pharma because we have intellectual property for our lead program. We actually, I think we're the only company in sort of the psychedelic space that has an issued, not a filed, but an issued granted patent with patent life out to 2036. So, you know, that's what big pharma is looking for. Really, they're looking for next generation. They really are not going to partner with the first generation companies who don't have intellectual property. They're really excited, and we've seen a lot of interest in partnering because we've got basically, you know, a domain expert big pharma team who knows how to develop and invent drugs, and we have composition of matter intellectual property that's granted for our first asset, and we're going to have basically the same thing for our psychedelics compounds. Are all going to be protected by filed composition of matter patents. So I think we're pretty unique in the space in doing, you know, really looking at the long term and developing drugs that are better than what's currently out there that work, but need to be replaced with safer drugs to be a bigger market.
Right. So as I understand, then an ideal partner would be a big pharma, or you would also be interested like mid-size, small-size partners, because we do have on BioNeex, besides big pharmas, also mid-size companies. They are actively seeking licensing targets.
I think for us, again, since we have two assets, it depends, right? So most important is the company. There are very few CNS companies anyway.
Right.
So first is domain expertise. They have to know and have development expertise in those CNS indications, either in the infantile epilepsies, right, for the first asset, or in neuropsychiatry. So A, they have to have the domain expertise, and B, they have to have the financial wherewithal to do that development. So, you know, in the case of, fortunately, in the case of psychedelics, it used to be onerous to do depression drugs, but since these are essentially, you can get a signal in early clinical trials, that makes it a little different. It's really a game changer. Even mid-sized companies, I would say, can do that from a financial standpoint. The real issue is, do they have the domain expertise? Do they have a clinical development team who has the firepower and also the expertise to do that? So those are the two pieces, and we're open. And the infantile epilepsy is kind of a specialty market, so that's well suited. GW Pharma went it alone and took Epidiolex to the market. So obviously mid-tier can do that as well.
Sounds good. You mentioned about a little bit about the team. So can you clarify about team and experience and yourself, so the audience will understand how well is drive this company, and what's the next milestone this experienced team is now pushing the company towards that to reach?
Sure. So, I mean, on the chemistry side, we have, our other co-founder, Alan, was a professor, Alan Kozakowski. We're really blessed. He endowed the company with the first asset in the pipeline, this 5-HT2C drug, tons of research and funding from also another leader in the pharmacology field, world recognized as Brian Roth. And what we have is that asset, knowing all that chemistry of tremendous expertise from him, and that first asset was then in-licensed exclusively to us from the University of Illinois in Chicago. So, we have all that domain expertise there. And for myself, I've been doing, next generation drugs for 30 years. I started out at Sandoz and Novartis and Alzheimer's disease. And I've basically been in venture companies for the last 25 years, putting numerous drugs into the clinic that are small molecules for CNS diseases. So, we've got that base covered. And we have all these insights into psychedelic chemistry because we've been working on this for a long time and essentially doing this molecular structure activity understanding. We've got lead compounds in the psychedelics that already do what we want them to do. And the key there is we've got a leader in pharmacology. So we've got the domain expert named Professor John McCorvey. He studied under other psychedelics. He's got the psychedelic pedigree. He worked for Brian Roth at UNC. He worked for John Nichols, who's the guru of psychedelics. And so he's got all the specialized pharmacology that you need to determine whether your drug is hitting the target and is selective. So, and then beyond that, we've got a team of domain experts in drug development that are ex-big pharma or biotech, seasoned veterans in the field as well. And, we've also, of course, got a chief medical officer who has deep expertise in numerous biotech companies as well. So we're well positioned. We know how to design drugs. We know how to profile them, select them, and advance them through the clinic.
It sounds the company is really, really covered with experts and people having the quite experience already. And can you then a little bit tell us the whole leadership team, what's the next milestone that trying to get?
So the next milestone is essentially the clinical entry for the lead asset, which is this 5-HT2C for Dravet and infantile epilepsy disorders. And we expect that to be happening by Q2 of 2022 next year to enter the clinical phase 1, first in human. So that's number one. It's undergoing the IND enabling work right now. And then behind that is basically psychedelics. So we have lead compounds that are meeting sort of what the profile we want. And now it's basically narrowing that down and also moving that into the clinic. And that also would be roughly 1-2 quarters behind the other programs. So again, later in the year in 2022, we would see advancing that. So those are the big milestones for the company, and financially, in terms of the current capital position or finance cash position of the company, we're positioned to reach those 2 milestones with capital that's currently been raised. So we're well positioned to reach those milestones on the financings we've already executed on.
That was actually my next question to ask you a little bit about the current funding situation. And also at the start of the interview, you mentioned that you are preparing also to go on NASDAQ. You have been besides on a Canadian stock exchange listed already on the ATC. Can you a little bit tell us about your next round that you are looking for? What's like expectations on the financial side of the company?
Sure, sure. So the last round was raised with blue chip institutional investors, and essentially the next capital raise, the plan is based as part of the NASDAQ listings, which will be done through an investment bank, well-known, high-profile investment bank. We're already speaking to those bankers, are in the final selection for which banker will lead that round. We will also then, on the heels of the listing, be planning another capital raise to be led by investment bank that we're finally narrowing down the selection to. So again, the listing, we're talking about a timeline towards the end of the year, essentially for listing and capital raise on the US market.
It sounds exciting. I think lots of retail investors are waiting IPOs of of your company on NASDAQ.
Yeah. Essentially the company is public already, so the listing will be associated. You're right. The retail investors will have an opportunity. Actually, the best opportunity for retail investors is now, before that capital raise, because it is public. So, I mean, it is accessible. Unfortunately, it is on the Canadian market in Canada, but there is an OTC market in the US.
Yes.
So retail investors, I would suggest, the opportunity currently exists prior to the NASDAQ listing. It's an opportunity already now in advance of the NASDAQ listing.
Yeah, that's true. That's a great opportunity to join the journey now. But then it brings me to the last question. So we all will understand what's the vision of the company, how you, part of the leadership team, see that.
So, I mean, our mission is medicine, right? I mean, obviously, there's the obligations, and the profit motive is clearly important to us. But really, our vision is to, like I said, number one, get the power of psychedelics and the efficacy to be realized, not for 100 patients, not for, small trials that take 10 years. It's taken 10 years just to dose and get the data on 100 patients or hundreds of patients that tell us that these things work. The big jump next is not to have to wait another 10 or 20 years for you to be able to get this drug, right? Right? For everybody, for your friends, for your neighbors. Everybody knows someone who's had depression, right? So our vision is to make a next generation drug where, there's the capital incentive and there's a market success, but that goes hand in hand with market penetration and treating patients. So that's our vision. Our vision is, the long game, really getting these medicines, but not waiting enough 10 years, getting big pharma or pharmaceutical companies to get the capital behind that. To do that, you've got to have the compound, but you need a lot of capital, right? And if there's no profit, if the drugs aren't patented, all the goodwill in the world is not going to make it happen fast. So the more people that are involved making, drugs that companies will license and advance, we want as many players competing with us doing this, and big pharma coming in, and pharmaceutical companies that are, visionaries aggressively pushing these therapies. So that's really our goal, is to get the potential of these things that now everybody understands. The devil's in the details now.
Right.
To make good drugs that are safe, that everybody can take, that the FDA, the regulators will not restrict, right? And that people can market and sell at a reasonable price to the target patients. That's really our vision.
Wow, it's a great vision. It sounds really exciting. Thank you, Dr. Shapiro. It was great talking to you today. I want to remind once again, our guest today at BioNeex interview is a co-founder and vice president of discovery of Bright Minds Biosciences, Dr. Gideon Shapiro. Once again, I want to remind that BrightMind Biosciences is a Canadian stock exchange listed company, which soon going to be also be on the NASDAQ, dedicated to developing next generation therapeutics to improve the lives of patients with severe and life-altering brain diseases. Thanks again, Dr. Shapiro.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. We will come again with another BioNeex interview.